Hello and welcome to this episode of Congressional Conversations, where we discuss the priorities of the New York Jewish community with members of the New York Congressional Delegation. I'm your host, Michael Miller, the Executive Vice President and CEO of the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York, JCRC-NY. And today, hailing from New York's 11th Congressional District, we welcome a good friend, Representative Nicole Malliotakis. Representative Malliotakis is newly elected to Congress and serves on two very important committees. One is the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, and she's also on the Foreign Affairs Committee, where she's the ranking member of the International Development, International Organization, and Global Corporate Impact Subcommittee. I believe I got all that correct. And it's my pleasure to welcome you, Congresswoman, to Congressional Conversations. Hi.
It's great to be with you. I want to thank you, Mike, for all the wonderful work that you do. And your organization is certainly one that is admired and respected here in New York and across the nation. So thank you for having me today.
Thank you. Yeah, you mentioned here in New York, we always think we're in New York, even though we're not in New York, and you're sitting in your office in DC and can be called off to a vote any minute now. So we're going to have a brief conversation today and try to find some other opportunity to extend our conversations with Representative Malliotakis. So first, a personal question, your background. Can you tell us a little bit about where you grew up? I understand you were born in Manhattan, of all places, but you grew up in Staten Island. And what inspired you to run for Congress?
Well, thank you, Mike. Yeah, so my district right now is Staten Island and Southern Brooklyn, but I was born in Manhattan. I moved to Staten Island when I was 2 years old, and my parents had a small business actually in the Brooklyn side. But I'll tell you a little bit about my parents came to this country. My mom's a Cuban refugee. My dad is a Greek immigrant, and it's a quintessential New York love story where two people from opposite sides of the world can meet and fall in love, have a family, and have an American dream. And so my parents came to this country. My mother, under different circumstances, my mother fled communist regime of Fidel Castro. My father left the birthplace of democracy to seek just better opportunity. And so they came here as very poor immigrants, not knowing the language, not having family or friends. And they met each other and they built a nice life. They became small business owners and very hardworking people. And my mom in particular is the one who encouraged me to get involved in politics. She brought me as a high school student down to the local campaign office of then city councilman Vito Fossella, who was running for Congress. Right. And so that was my very first, I was a junior in high school. It was my very first experience volunteering, making phone calls, handing out flyers at the supermarket. It's interesting now to see 23 years later, I actually represent that very seat in Congress. And so it's exciting. It's been a long journey. But prior to this, I worked first of all, I was a state legislator, as you know, for 10 years, and very exciting about what we've been able to accomplish as members of the state legislature, both pro and stopping bad policies from happening. And then prior to that, I was working for the local energy company doing public affairs, community relations, supporting everything from the local STEM programs for our children, our youth, to science, technology, engineering programs, to energy efficiency programs, to helping kids put green roofs on top of their schools. And so really cool stuff, really community focused stuff. And before that, I worked for Governor George Pataki. And so, I've always been involved in Staten Island and Southern Brooklyn, that community in one way or another. And I'm very honored now to represent this community that I love. And I grew up in Staten Island and Brooklyn in Congress.
I actually accompanied Governor Pataki to Israel on one of his trips. And as well, I accompanied on a separate trip his wife, Libby, to Israel. I look forward someday to traveling to Israel with you as well. But let's dive into issues, considering the lack of time. Transportation. The 11th Congressional District spans Staten Island and a chunk of Brooklyn. And there's some very unique challenges regarding transportation, as we all know. What are some of the challenges that you have faced helping New Yorkers get from Brooklyn to Staten Island to Brooklyn?
Well, so first of all, I'm very honored to be a member of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee because transportation is such a big issue in my district. And so I fought very hard to get on this committee. And I could tell you, just looking at, if you look at my district, you see why transportation is so important. You have a Coast Guard base there, a maritime industry, shipping ports, cruise terminal, ferries. You're surrounded by three, aerial airports. We have shipping ports, container terminals. So there's a lot going on in my district. And then, of course, everyone knows you have the subway system and Staten Island Railway. And so there really is a lot happening. And so I felt that would be the best committee where I could assist. I think one of the biggest issues right now is that we need to modernize our infrastructure. And that is why Transportation Infrastructure Committee is so important. I believe that the president is looking to do a transportation infrastructure package. What we really need to focus on as a city is to try to upgrade our subway signals. So they're communication-based train control. Cities like Copenhagen and Paris and Vancouver all have that. We don't. And yet, we're in New York City. Aside from that, tolling.
Yeah, ours dates back like 50 years or something.
Ours goes back. Actually, some of the equipment is even pre-World War II, believe it or not. But this would allow the trains to run quicker, so you could fit more trains. They don't have to be so far apart. They run faster. They're more efficient, more reliable. So there's a lot of benefits to dealing with population growth and economic growth by doing this. And of course, that's a long-term plan. We've started doing some of it already, but that's going to be an ongoing investment that we need to make. Look, tolling is obviously a big issue. It's an obstacle. I'm very upset that the MTA received $8 billion in federal aid. They're about to get another $6 billion, and yet they still went and increased tolls across the city. I've asked the governor to step in, and because he controls the MTA board, and if they're going to be receiving all this funding, they need to stop the toll increases. And this third thing that I've been working on, just my very first bill, you should know, is actually a bill that would return the extra money from two-way tolling on the Verrazano Bridge back to the residents of Staten Island and Brooklyn in the form of a rebate, a credit, or just a reduction in toll, because now they're estimated to earn about $15 million a year in extra revenue. And so that should go back to the toll payers, not into the MTA black hole. So that was my first bill, and I'm very excited about that. And look, we're going to continue to look for ways to improve our infrastructure, expand transit options. Obviously, money's tight right now. And people, there's just, there's some, we have to be fiscally conservative, but we also need to make the right investments in the right projects to deal with economic and population growth.
Oh, absolutely. And our population, of course, is being hit very hard by the plague, by COVID-19, by the pandemic. So again, limited time. So just throw a couple of questions at you regarding COVID-19 and your district. Healthcare, small business, and access to vaccines. First, healthcare. What kind of healthcare disparities have been exacerbated during this pandemic, and what reforms to our healthcare system do you propose to eliminate them?
Yeah, well, so I think that first of all, we need to bring our supply chain home. We've learned that, right? PPE, pharmaceuticals, medical equipment. We need to bring that supply chain home. We can't be dependent on countries like China. I also think we need to expand the free market, right, when it comes to healthcare and healthcare coverage. Unfortunately, with these exchanges, we're seeing the premiums go up, the co-pays go up because there isn't competition. So we need to encourage that to drive down the cost of healthcare. I think there's certain things we need to preserve also. I sponsored to preserve pre-existing coverage on the state level. The President Trump did that on the federal level. We need to make sure that's in statute. And also, coverage for young adults who within households. We have to make sure they remain covered under. So there's certain things that we can keep in terms of the Affordable Care Act, but there's certain things that we need to change to drive down cost and encourage competition. I think that what we learned also is we need Staten Island. My part of Staten Island doesn't have a public hospital, so we want to make sure that we're bringing funds that we are entitled to as New York City
Yeah.
residents and taxpayers, because we don't have our hospital. We should be investing to expand the emergency rooms and make some investments at our existing hospitals. So I think that's one thing that we could be looking at as well. So there's a lot to be looking at and learn from this pandemic. But I think that those are a couple of the main things that we need to focus on immediately. Great.
Small business. There's so many small businesses in Staten Island. Certainly when I've driven through, I've seen them. They must have been hit very, very hard. So what can you as a member of Congress do to assist our small business owners?
Look, we're pushing for the Restaurant Act, number one, that would help these restaurants that were shut down by our governor and our mayor, no fault of their own. They suffered losses. The PPP is a continuing program that's providing grants, which is providing some relief for our small businesses. We want to continue to support that. I think one of the problems with this $1.9 trillion package that Speaker Pelosi is pushing through is that there's very little accountability. It's not tailored. We have $1 trillion left over from the previous package that's still not unspent. That's still not spent. And she's trying to pass this $1.9 trillion. So of course I support extending unemployment for those who lost their jobs. Of course, I want to see taxpayers receive money back in the form of a stimulus check. I want to make sure that we encourage small businesses to apply for PPP and continue to fund that. But when you have all sorts of other things that have nothing to do with COVID, we need to push back against that type of wasteful spending. Less than 1% of the relief package actually goes to vaccination, production, and distribution. And if you ask any leader, Democrat or Republican, local or national, they'll tell you that is the number one priority. So the fact that it's less than 1% of this spending plan just shows you how bloated the package is. So I think we need to make sure we're focusing in the right places. I've also asked, by the way, Governor Cuomo, Mayor de Blasio, you receive federal aid, freeze our taxes. Don't even think about increasing income taxes that are driving New Yorkers out of the state, and property taxes that is increasing the cost for homeowners and for renters who see that cost passed on to them. Yeah, and thanks for that. And vaccines. What can be done, again, on a federal level? You're in the minority right now as a Republican, but you have a voice, and you've always had a voice. Before you got to Congress, you had the voice too. But now that you are in Congress, what voice can you raise to ensure that the volume of vaccines needed in New York City in particular, come into the city? Yeah, we've already been successful, actually, in expanding the number of distribution sites for veterans in particular. We've worked very closely with the VA to make sure that the veterans hospitals, as well as their clinics, are offering the vaccination. I'm very proud of my team for spearheading that. We've also have been working with the local pharmacies to add more sites. So now there's a federal pharmacy group, and we've been working closely with Walgreens and Rite Aid to expand the number of sites offering vaccinations in my district, and also making sure that the vaccines don't go to waste. So sometimes there's last minute appointments, and they've been very good with working with us to fill those appointments rather than throwing the vaccines away, which we don't want to see happen. And of course, the president issued the Defense Production Act. So we're seeing more supply. It's gone up significantly since mid-January. And so we are continuing to work on that. And now with Johnson & Johnson coming online, that's going to be a lot more doses that we're going to be seeing get to the community. So for me, it's about continuing to advocate for more supply, expanding the number of distribution sites through these various networks, and then encouraging people to get their vaccination. And any way we can help with that, we will continue to do so. Yeah, no, that's great. And thank you for your advocacy in that regard. When it comes to public health, we need as many voices to speak out to ensure the health of New York City residents and others, of course, as well. Shifting gears, talking about what happened before the pandemic. In the few months leading up to the pandemic, there was a
just a spate of anti-Semitic attacks, very bloody anti-Semitic. Of course, there was Pittsburgh, there was Poway, but then there was Jersey City, and then, of course, up in Muncie. But while all that was happening, individual members of our Jewish community, particularly those who dressed in traditional garb, mostly in the Brooklyn neighborhoods of Williamsburg, Borough Park, Flatbush, were set upon. And we saw as well on January 6th, with the riots down in DC, the Auschwitz T-shirt and all that. What can we do? What can you do as a member of Congress? You've always been a friend of the Jewish community. What can we do, and what can you do in order to try to end this trend towards hatred, particularly against the Jewish community?
Yeah, it's absolutely awful. And I think the one thing that we should be doing is always condemning it and making sure it's known that we don't accept this, we don't tolerate it, and that we believe that there needs to be consequences for such actions. Well, I've always been somebody who's been consistent, regardless of where the hate has come from. But I'll tell you, one of the things that I've worked on was to get hate crimes added back onto the list in which a judge can use discretion to set bail. That was something that was eliminated in the bail reform, and it was outrageous. And we were seeing a lot of these hate crimes and being committed, and people being released and committing more crimes. It was completely unacceptable. So pushing back and getting that fixed was one big thing. I also think it's important that we continue to teach our youth about the Holocaust. You know, I all too often hear these terms being thrown around lightly. Nazi, concentration camp, Holocaust, being thrown away in ways that diminish the definition. And as somebody who went to Yad Vashem Memorial in Jerusalem, and really, I think it was the most powerful thing I've ever experienced was being in that memorial. And I think every American should go, particularly elected officials, should visit Yad Vashem and learn and see when you compare what's happening at the southern border to concentration camp. That's really outrageous. You know, when you call an elected official a Nazi simply because you don't agree with them, that's outrageous.
That's outrageous.
And we cannot, it's happening every single day on social media. And so I think it's unfortunate, and we need to educate our young people about what the Holocaust really was and why it can never be repeated, and why we don't use those terms lightly or loosely, and that they have real meaning. And there's millions of lives behind those meanings. And so I think that that's another thing that we need to be very mindful of, and people need to speak out against, as I have. And I also think, look, what the signage, the T-shirts you've mentioned, January 6th, absolutely offensive. We've seen flyers in New York City, absolutely offensive. I've called for hate crimes to do an investigation into that, to try to see where it's stemming from. I've discussed that with the NYPD. It's just a matter of making sure that we're being vocal, and that we're asking for these crimes, when they are crimes, to be held accountable, and fighting for justice. And I think that we have to just continue to do that. I think education really is so important of our youth, so they understand these words that they're using.
No, you're absolutely correct. And as you well know, regrettably, houses of worship, particularly our houses of worship, synagogues, have been targeted by vandals time and again, to be scrawled with various graffiti, including swastikas. Fortunately, the federal government has a nonprofit security grant program, NSGP, that can provide funds to nonprofits as well as houses of worship, as well as religious institutions. That's something, again, you as a congressperson can work on to increase the amount. This past year, it was increased in the House bill from $90 million to $360 million. The Senate knocked it back to $180 million. $180 million is a significant amount, but it's still not enough. I assume that you're going to be in the forefront of the call to increase as much as possible from DHS to the states, the NSGP program.
No, absolutely. I think it's a very important, and actually the application process just opened up for 2021.
Yep.
And, your viewers should know that they have until May to submit applications if they're interested. And, my office can assist with providing that application link, or they can go to the DHS website, or grants.gov, I believe is the website, where you can just put in a search nonprofit security and the application will come up.
Well, in fact, the wise thing for folks to do, particularly in the Jewish community, is to contact JCRC. We conduct webinars year after year after year about filling out a pretty arcane application. Yeah. So just filling it out isn't really going to work. So feel free to contact our Community Security Initiative, our CSI, and we can be very, very helpful. But we thank you as a member of Congress for the advocacy in that regard to ensure that our houses of worship and not-for-profits are protected. And finally, the last issue, a very important one, you're on the Foreign Affairs Committee, for God's sakes, foreign investment. As a ranking member of the International Development, International Organization, and Global Corporate Impact Committee, how do you track where our tax dollars go overseas?
Well, it's a new committee assignment. I'm very honored as a freshman. I'm the only freshman that did receive a ranking member spot on a subcommittee. It's a newly formed committee, so we're actually going to be meeting for the first time next week. But basically, the intention of this committee is to look at our membership in international organizations like World Health Organization, like the United Nations and NATO, and also look at aid that we're giving, foreign aid that's being given, and also looking at some of the obstacles that some of our corporations and businesses have and when they're trying to do business overseas. And so I think there's a lot to this committee, and we're still trying to figure out what the main focus is going to be. But I think obviously, I think we need to be very strategic when it comes to foreign aid. When people saw what was in the previous COVID package, some of them were very outraged, my constituents, because they felt that the money is being used improperly. When you look at this COVID package, $3.5 billion going to the Global Fund on AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis. But when you look at actually what that accounts, it's 88% that the American taxpayers are funding. Wow. In an international organization's expenditures. Where are the other countries? Why are we paying for 88% of their expenditures? And why is it in a COVID bill? Because it's really unrelated. But aside from that, we need to realize that we have to make foreign investments, aid, but it has to be strategic, and there's got to be a purpose for it. It's got to be something that benefits American security, the American economy, and that is the position that I'm taking moving forward into this committee to make sure that taxpayer funds are being utilized appropriately.
And of course, you've always been outspoken in your support of the state of Israel. And among the irritants to the state of Israel is this boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. So again, in the platform that you now have, previously as an assembly member, now as a member of Congress, and as a ranking member of a subcommittee in the Foreign Affairs Committee, what actions can be taken to protect Israel from this vicious BDS movement?
Yeah, well, of course, we have to make it clear that we don't support this movement, and it hurts America as a movement. A lot of the technology, a lot of things that we enjoy here in America are created in Israel, and it hurts us when we hurt Israel. And I think we have to understand that. Well, one of the things I've been very vocal on is actually ensuring that we build upon the Abraham Accords, and that we don't just, that the president just doesn't dismantle them simply because they came from President Trump and some of his leadership. We need to make sure that we're building upon this success. We need to make sure that we further isolate Iran. And when you look at the Abraham Accords and you look at the success that it has had already, I mean, when you talk about economic opportunity, security, cooperation, counterterrorism cooperation, and the stress that it has put and the pressure it has put on Iran, I think it's already been successful. We need to build upon that and try to normalize relationships with other countries in that region. But I also believe, and I'm actually co-sponsoring legislation that actually requires the president to go before Congress before lifting sanctions on Iran, because we are concerned that he's going to try to move forward and give too many concessions. I think that Iran, we can't allow Iran to sense weakness. He's already being tested by the regime, and we need to make sure that we're very clear that there cannot be any withdrawal of sanctions unless they are going to seriously negotiate with America and not to our disadvantage, as we're seeing happening in other agreements that the president's been making. So that's something I think that's incredibly important for the members of the Foreign Affairs to be vigilant about and be vocal about. And I'm really proud that that's one of the first bills that I'm co-sponsoring as a member of that committee.
Well, we're very proud to have a member of the New York delegation on the Foreign Affairs Committee. The chair, of course, is from the other party. And it's good to have a Republican on that committee as well. And again, with the senior role that you're playing as a freshman member. So congratulations on that. I also have, before we wrap up, a very warm spot for Staten Island. When I was training as a U.S. Army chaplain, I was in both Fort Wadsworth in Staten Island and in Fort Hamilton in Brooklyn. We were billeted at Wagner College, which I think is in your, is it that in your district?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
And I have my MBA from Wagner College.
Right, and I saw that you have your MBA from Wagner. So I spent some really good months living in Staten Island in actuality, and commuting across the Verrazano Bridge to Fort Ham. Anyway, it's been a pleasure having you on Congressional Conversations. Can I give you the last word before we sign off?
Well, look, I appreciate it. And first of all, you're well known on Staten Island. You've come around quite a few times and we've had the opportunity to meet. And I look forward to continuing to work with your relationship. I think as a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, I think there's a lot of great things that we can do together to support our ally Israel, and also ensure that the Jewish population in my community has the best representation possible. And we're here to assist with synagogues or any organizations in my district that are seeking support. And we can certainly look at trying to help as much as possible with the security grants. So, I just want everyone to know that we're here and we're really, really excited. So just so people understand, my district is all of Staten Island and Southern Brooklyn, the neighborhoods of Bay Ridge, Dyker Heights, Bensonhurst, Gravesend, and a little bit of Sheepshead Bay and Bath Beach. And so really, really excited to continuing the advocacy on behalf of our community, and let's continue to work together as best as we can.
I really very much look forward to it, Congresswoman Malliotakis, and to our audience. Thank you so much for watching. To learn more about some of the issues we discussed today, you can check out our website, JCRC-NY.org, and our focus on communal priorities. It's available. That document is available there. And again, my warmest thanks to the Congresswoman for sharing this past half hour with us. Shalom to all. Look forward to seeing you again on Congressional Conversations. Bye-bye.
Thank you.